Good evening, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'm presenting a social justice discussant on the school-to-prison pipeline, a system that quietly and sometimes violently reroutes vulnerable students from classrooms into courtrooms. The image you see here was taken by Johanna Garcia, a New York City Council nominee at a 2022 protest against the school-to-prison pipeline in New York City. It's not just a photo, it's a call, a reminder that this issue is not theoretical. It's lived, it's urgent, and it's ours to confront. Let's begin by understanding what this pipeline is and why it matters, especially for counselors. Here's our agenda. We'll define the pipeline, explore its historical roots, examine examples and statistics, and then move towards strategies, both restorative and systemic. We'll reflect on why this matters for counselors. I'll share personal insights, and then we'll end with a call to action. The school-to-prison pipeline refers to policies and practices that push marginalized students, especially Black youth and disabled students and LGBTQ+ youth, out of schools and into the criminal justice system. Although the pipeline reference is metaphorical, this unfortunately is a measurable trajectory that is very much real. It's shaped by zero-tolerance policies, racial bias, surveillance, and systemic neglect. When schools mirror prisons, with metal detectors, police officers, and exclusionary discipline, we're not just failing students, we're criminalizing their existence. For counselors, this intersects directly with trauma, access to education, and our ethical responsibility to protect and advocate for those who are oppressed. This pipeline didn't appear overnight. After Brown versus Board of Education, punitive discipline was used to control newly integrated classrooms. Then came the 1994 Gun-Free Schools Act. This mandated expulsions, even for non-violent infractions. Tough on crime became tough on kids. States followed suit. For example, in Texas, vague terms like defiance and serious misbehavior gave educators unchecked discretion disproportionately applied to Black youth. School resource officers became embedded in schools, turning minor infractions into arrestable offenses. And culturally, Black students began to be viewed not through a lens of care, but criminality. This is institutionalized racism and is policy-driven. Let's look at two recent federal investigations as examples. In Florida, a district was found to be discriminating against disabled students, using suspensions and police referrals instead of behavioral supports. No training, no policies, just punishment. In California, Black students were disciplined more harshly than white peers, and police were only deployed to schools with higher Black populations. Students were pepper sprayed, cited for things like littering, and sent to juvenile court. These aren't isolated cases. They're systemic patterns, and every time a student is removed from class, they're losing learning time, they're losing emotional safety, and they're losing a piece of their future as they're being pushed down and held back from reaching their potential. Here we have some statistics. The numbers are staggering. Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than white peers. Native Americans, Latins, and Pacific Islanders students are also facing disproportionate discipline. 2.7 million students received out-of-school suspensions in a single year. Nearly half of California's suspensions were for willful defiance, things like refusing to remove a hat. Students with disabilities are suspended at double the rate of their peers, and boys of color with disabilities face even higher risks. Schools with police see a 21% increase in exclusionary discipline. And here's a long-term impact. Students from stricter schools are more likely to be arrested, drop out, and be incarcerated as adults. This is not just about discipline, it's about life trajectories. Let's break this down. Zero tolerance policies don't ask why a student is acting out. They don't consider hunger, they don't consider trauma, they don't consider poverty, and they don't consider disability. They just remove, and removal leads to academic decline, dropout, and incarceration. Black students are suspended at triple the rate of white peers, even for identical behaviors. This reflects adultification bias, racialized surveillance, and institutionalized racism. Long term, it means reduced earnings, higher unemployment, and generational poverty. And for the communities, it means broken trust and cycles that are hard to escape. This is not just a school issue, it's a justice issue. So what do we do now? As one strategy, we can start with restorative justice. Behaviors labeled as defiance are often trauma responses. Restorative practices focus on accountability, dialogue, and healing, not punishment. They involve the person harmed, the person who caused the harm, and the community. Healing circles, peer meditation, and facilitated conversations rebuild trust. Counselors play a key role here as facilitators, advocates, and models of relational repair, and the data backs it up. Schools implementing restorative practices saw up to 90% reductions in suspensions. This is what trauma-informed care looks like in action. Restorative practices are powerful, but we also need systemic change. Counselors must leverage ethical codes to challenge harmful policies. We must advocate for the elimination of zero-tolerance policies. We must push for reduced police presence in schools. Replace punitive infrastructure with counselors, social workers, and community supports. And we must engage families, students, and community organizations. Change doesn't happen from the top down. It comes from collective action. Community-led reform is how we heal and how we sustain justice. So why is this important for counselors to be aware of? This issue is central to our profession. The ACA Code of Ethics calls us to challenge systemic injustice. The SCA supports inclusive discipline and restorative approaches. The pipeline is a trauma pathway, and trauma requires care, not control. Counselors must respond with cultural humility, bias awareness, and trauma-informed interventions. We cannot be neutral. We are responsible. So here's what I reflected on. So as I continue with the counseling program, I find myself reflecting not just on what I've learned, but on what I've witnessed and what I refuse to ignore. When I attended public grade schools, I've seen students punished for the way they've learned to survive. A clenched fist, a raised voice, a refusal to comply. These aren't just behaviors, they're signals, they're stories, they're survival strategies shaped by trauma, instability, and unmet needs. And yet, in too many schools, these signals are met with exclusion. They're met with suspension. They're met with police. As an aspiring therapist, I'm learning to ask, what is beneath this behavior? What pain is the student carrying? What unmet need is being expressed in the only way they know how? Therapy teaches us to listen before we label, to hold space for complexity, to respond with curiosity, not control. But in systems shaped by punishment, even the most well-intentioned professionals can be blind to their biases and not understand that there might be something else going on. institutions are told to document, to refer, to remove. But what if the system itself is the source of harm? I've had to confront my own role. If I'm not actively working to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, if I'm not advocating for trauma-informed care, for culturally responsive practices, for relational repair, then I risk becoming complicit. That's a hard truth, but it's also a call to action personally. As a future therapist, I want to be someone who sees the whole child, not just the moment of crisis, but the context. Not just the behavior, but the history. Not just the struggle, but the strength. I want to protect them, not harm them and re-traumatize them. I want to promote restoration over removal, trust over surveillance, empathy over enforcement, because every student deserves to be seen, not just for what they've done, but for who they are, for who they're becoming. And if I don't show up with compassion, I become part of this pipeline. I refuse that role. Instead, I choose to be part of the healing, to listen deeply, to respond ethically, to advocate relentlessly, because therapy isn't just about the individual, it's about the systems that shape them, and justice begins with how we choose to show up in every room, with every student, every time. So here I have my references. The insights I've shared today are grounded in research, from federal investigations to review of statistics to academic studies and scholarly journal articles. And these sources reflect years of advocacy, data, and lived experience. They're not just citations, they're evidence, they're truth. And so lastly, I want to talk about the call of action. So what now? As we navigate in our communities, we each have a role. And we each have a potential and ability to step up. And within each of these roles, I've listed a few call of actions, starting with counselors. So counselors, stand with marginalized students. Challenge policies that criminalize pain. Organize. Amplify youth voices. Reframe discipline as care. For the educators, lead with empathy. Build trust. And it's very important as educators to advocate for alternatives to exclusion. For policymakers, redirect funding. Invest in counselors instead, not cops. End policies that target children of color. And for everyone, educate yourself, speak out, defend students' rights, join the fight for equity, because every child deserves to be safe and seen and supported. I appreciate your time. Thank you.